The first thing drill instructor Voreth said to us was that nothing on the range would kill us if we paid attention. The second thing he said was that we should not mistake that for safety. He was tall in the way that the Cathari are tall, not stretched, but stacked, layer over layer of dense gray muscle packed into a body that moved like a machine, doing exactly what it was designed to do and nothing else. His crest was the deep charcoal of a senior instructor, not the pale gray-green of the training cadets who stood in 3 neat columns behind me, their breathing measured, and their eyes fixed on a point 2 feet above Voreth's left shoulder the way Ketahir protocol demanded. I stood in the 4th column, the human column, which was to say I stood by myself. My name is Saravech. I was 41 years old when the compact posted me to the Ketahir Combined Arms Qualification Range at Orvith Station, and I want to be precise about what that means, because the word posted makes it sound like a clerical decision, a form processed somewhere in the administrative interior of the compact's deep bureaucracy. In practice, it meant that I was the first human being to qualify for the Ketahir Range program, that the compact's liaison office had spent 11 months negotiating the terms of my attendance, and that when I arrived, Voreth looked at me for a long moment without moving, and then wrote something in his log that I couldn't read from where I was standing. I had been a structural demolitions specialist for 23 years. Before that, I had done 2 combat postings with the Earth Consolidated Engineering Corps in environments where the word hostile applied not only to the opposition, but to the ground, the air, the water table, and in one memorable case the local fungal biosphere. I had qualified on 11 weapon systems across 4 planetary environments. I had held a high-altitude demolition certification for 19 years without a lapse. The compact liaison officer who processed my placement paperwork had reviewed all of this and written, in the summary field of my application, "Candidate presents adequate prior experience in controlled environment demolition scenarios." I did not hold this against her. She was Sulith, and the Sulith are not a martial species. She had done her best with a vocabulary that did not contain the concepts she needed. The Ketahir had a word for it, Orak. It translated roughly as the quality of being made dangerous by one's world. It was not a compliment they extended freely. In 4,000 years of recorded Ketahir history, Orak had been used to describe exactly 9 species, and the Ketahir themselves headed the list. They had been shaped by Kethorivar, which was a planet that wanted things dead. The gravity was 1.4 standard. The atmosphere was breathable, but only just, running high on particulate carbon from the continent-scale volcanic activity that had been in progress for the last 8 million years. The fauna had evolved in competition with the geology itself, which meant that the things Ketahir children were taught to avoid included approximately 47 organisms that could kill a standard adult in under 3 minutes and one in under 40 seconds. The Ketahir came off that world and looked at the rest of the galaxy and found it soft. They were not wrong exactly. They were also not entirely right, but the error was understandable because the species that might have corrected them had not, until 11 months before I arrived at Orvith Station, done anything that put them in the same room as a Ketahir with a training roster. I want to be precise about that too. Humans had been in contact with the compact for 31 years. We had negotiated trade agreements and diplomatic frameworks, and an exchange program that had sent, in 31 years, a total of 63 humans to various compact institutions in various non-combat roles. There were human linguists at the Orvith Translation Bureau. There was a human structural engineer at the Ketahir shipyard who had been there for 9 years, and who, by all accounts, was well regarded and caused no friction. There were 4 human physicians at the compact medical exchange doing work that everyone acknowledged was excellent. None of them had ever stood on a Ketahir weapons range. I was aware, standing in my single-person column on the first morning of the program, that I was doing something that had a weight beyond itself. The compact liaison officer had been careful to explain this to me before I shipped out. "You should understand," she had said, in the precise, slightly formal way the Sulith use when they are conveying something they find delicate, that the Ketahir qualification range is considered their primary institution for combat readiness assessment. It is not simply a training program. It is, for them, the instrument by which they measure whether a species is worth respecting in a military context. I had thanked her for the information. She had looked at me for a moment. "I want to be certain you understand what I mean. The Ketahir have run this program for 400 years. In that time, they have admitted 12 non-Ketahir species. Of those 12, 4 completed the qualification. 3 of those 4 are species that the Ketahir themselves classify as Orc." She paused. "I looked up the human dossier that was submitted with your application. I want you to know that I included everything I could find, but the Compact's human biology files are not complete. I am not certain the assessment committee had the full picture." "What did they think they were getting?" I asked. She chose her words carefully. "A qualified candidate from a species they consider promising, upward mobile, not yet fully evaluated." "Promising," I said. They were very polite about it. Standing on the range at Orvith Station, looking at drill instructor Voreth, and at the 3 columns of Ketahir cadets who were pretending I didn't exist, I thought about that conversation and found it clarifying. Voreth finished reading from his log. He set it aside and walked the line slowly, the way instructors walk when they want you to understand that they are looking at each of you individually and finding the same thing wanting. He stopped in front of me. He was a head taller than I was. His eyes were the flat amber of active Ketahir concentration, not hostile, exactly, but not warm. He looked at me the way you look at a piece of equipment you've been told is rated for something you don't quite believe. "Vetch," he said. "Sir." "You have reviewed the program specifications." "Yes, sir." "You understand that this program operates at Ketahir physical parameters." "Yes, sir." He waited. The waiting was deliberate. He was giving me the space to say something that would let him record a clean withdrawal at intake, no fault assigned, candidate self-selected out on grounds of physical incompatibility. It was a professional courtesy. He wasn't being cruel. He genuinely did not want to watch a human break on his range, and this was his one clean opportunity to prevent it. I looked at the point 2 feet above his left shoulder and waited him out. He looked at me for 3 more seconds, then he turned and walked back to the center of the line. "Program begins at 6th bell," he said. "Cadets will draw kit from the equipment bay. Kit draw is logged. Do not modify issued equipment. Any modification outside the approved list will result in a program deduction. Questions?" It wasn't phrased as a question. There were none. We drew kit. The Ketahir kit was well made. I want to say that plainly because there is a version of this story where I spend the first section cataloging the ways Ketahir equipment failed to account for human physiology, and that is not the story I am telling. The fit was manageable. The weight distribution was wrong for a human load-bearing frame, but it was wrong in predictable ways, and I had spent 23 years managing the wrong weight distributions of equipment designed for other species or other conditions. The environmental suit ran slightly hot for human metabolic range, but the range atmosphere was cool enough to offset it. The weapons were calibrated for Ketahir hand geometry, but the Ketahir hand is larger than a human hand, not smaller, which meant I was working with room to spare rather than the reverse. The one piece of kit I did not like was the fall arrest system, which was designed for a body mass of 90 to 140 kilograms, and I was running at 68. The system would function, but the function parameters were wide. I filed a notation in my kit log and kept it. The first week was assessment. The Ketahir run their assessment phase differently from any program I had trained in before. They do not give you increasingly difficult tasks. They give you the hardest task they intend to run in the program and watch what you do with it. If you finish, you have demonstrated you can finish. If you don't finish, they grade the failure mode and decide what it tells them. The philosophy is that baseline testing wastes time. If a candidate cannot manage the hardest day, there is nothing the medium days teach you that you didn't already know. The first assessment was the Orvith high-altitude traverse. The traverse is 11 kilometers of broken ground navigation at 2,000 meters above Orvith Station's reference datum, in atmosphere that runs at 83% standard pressure, with a particulate count that requires full filter mask after the first 30 minutes. The course is not marked. You are given a start point and an end point in grid coordinates and a 6-hour window. The Ketire cadets had trained on altitude exposure since their initial induction. It is part of the standard Ketire formation curriculum, and they moved through the traverse with the fluid economy of people for whom altitude discomfort is a managed variable rather than a limiting one. I had done high-altitude work for 11 years. My standard operating environment for the last 6 had been the shale mountain terrain of Vethara Station, which ran at 78% standard pressure and a temperature range that dropped to -30 at the survey altitudes I worked. I was not comfortable at altitude. Comfort was not the point. I had a calibrated response to altitude discomfort that told me what I could push through, what required adjustment, and what required stop. I knew the difference because I had learned it over 11 years and several near misses that had clarified the lessons considerably. I completed the traverse in 4 hours and 20 minutes. 3 of the Ketire cadets were faster. 17 were within 40 minutes of my time. The remaining 12 completed within the window. Voreth logged the results without comment. The second assessment was the underwater breach scenario. The Orvith Station training facility has a pressurized water tank, 80 meters long, 12 meters deep, fitted with a series of access doors and structural obstacles that can be reconfigured between runs. The scenario is straightforward. A simulated compromise section of a submerged installation, objective to transit from one end to the other. Identify 4 structural failure points, mark them, and exit. Breathing equipment is provided, but the provided equipment develops a partial failure at a randomized point between the 12 and 18-minute marks, and the candidate is expected to manage the partial failure and complete the scenario. I had done submerged environment work twice in my career, both times in controlled industrial conditions, and I want to be honest that I am not a natural in the water. The Ketire have a different relationship with aquatic environments than humans do. Kethorivar has substantial surface water, and Ketire young, swim seriously, and swim in conditions that would be considered extreme in most terrestrial species contexts. They are not at home in the water the way a species with aquatic ancestry would be, but they are competent. I found my competence margin and worked inside it. The partial failure triggered at 14 minutes, and I managed it the way I had been trained to manage it, which is to say, I did not manage it cleanly or with any particular grace, but I managed it without losing the scenario. I exited at 22 minutes with all 4 failure points marked. The median Ketire time was 19 minutes. Voreth noted my time. He noted it without the specific absence of comment he had used for the traverse, which I read as a register shift and filed accordingly. The third assessment was the one I had been waiting for without letting myself acknowledge I was waiting for it, because I had read the program specifications in full, and I knew it was coming, and I knew what it would mean. The Ketire call it the Orc trial. The name tells you everything. It is not a test of skill. It is not a test of strength. It is a test of whether the world made you dangerous. The setup is this. The candidate is placed in a sealed environmental chamber. The chamber is configured to run at conditions drawn from the candidate's home biosphere, gravity, atmosphere, temperature, humidity, all set to the parameters of the world the candidate came from. Then, one at a time, the chamber introduces stimuli, not simulated threats, but actual chemical and biological threat indicator compounds drawn from the most lethal organisms in the candidate's home environment. The Kettier reasoning is that an organism shaped by a genuinely dangerous world will have physiological response systems that react to those compounds at a level below conscious processing. The way prey animals twitch before a predator is visible, the way Kettier cadets can identify the chemical signature of a venom spine organism from 30 meters in low wind conditions. The test does not measure whether you can defeat the threat. It measures whether your body knows to care. The chamber tech set my parameters: 1 standard gravity, standard atmosphere, 18 degrees Celsius. Then they introduced the first compound. I am going to say something that may sound immodest, but I think it is important to say it plainly. Earth has been trying to kill things for a long time. We are a planet that generated, in approximately 4 billion years of competitive biochemistry, something on the order of 8 million identified species. The process by which it did so was not gentle. We have spiders whose venom disrupts the blood-clotting cascade in ways that took us 120 years to fully characterize. We have fungi that spend part of their life cycle in the central nervous tissue of insects. We have jellyfish that are, clinically speaking, immortal. We have plants that have developed specific, targeted chemical compounds to prevent exactly the animals that evolved to eat them from doing so, and the arms race between those plants and those animals has been running for 200 million years. Human beings did not come from outside that process. We came from inside it. We are the result of that process. Our immune systems are not defenses built against threats. They are the accumulated wins of 4 billion years of an ongoing fight that we are still, at this moment, in the middle of. Our physiological threat response systems are not academic. They are the inheritance of something older than our species. The compound they introduced first was the marker set for a black mamba. I know this because they showed me the test log afterward. What I knew at the time was that something shifted in the back of my awareness. Not a thought, not an image, but a low, very clean signal that said, "Pay attention." I paid attention. The signal sustained for about 30 seconds, and then I cross-referenced it against the available information in the chamber, which was a sealed room with no visible threats, and the rational layer of my processing concluded there was no actionable threat, and the signal downgraded. My heart rate had gone up by 11 beats per minute. It came back down over about 45 seconds. The second compound was the marker set for the box jellyfish. The third was the pheromone signature of the Sydney funnel web spider. The fourth was the chemical compound released by the blue-ringed octopus under stress. By the fourth compound, I was beginning to understand what the test was doing, and I found it interesting in the way you find an instrument interesting when you understand what it is measuring. My signal recognition chain was faster on 4 than on 1. I had, apparently, some cross-referencing capacity I hadn't known was there. The fifth compound was the marker associated with the inland taipan. The chamber text log recorded that my cortisol spike at compound 5 was the 4th highest response ever recorded in the Orc trial for a non-Kettier species. The highest was a Voth warrior, the second and third were Sethani, and the fourth was me. All 3 of those species are on the Kettier Orc list. Voreth came into the debrief room after the 3rd assessment. He sat across from me at the small table, and he looked at me for a while in the way he had looked at me on the first day, but the calculation in it was different. On the first day, he had been assessing a question he thought he already knew the answer to. Now he was assessing something he did not have a prior estimate for. "Your home world," he said. "Earth," I said. "You have the specifications." "I have the atmospheric and gravitational data." He paused. The biological data was listed as summary, see attachment. The attachment was not included in the dossier. I thought about the compact liaison officer. She had told me the files were incomplete. I had thanked her at the time without quite understanding what she meant. "What do you want to know?" I said. "How many of your native species are rated lethal to your own population?" I thought about this. Depends on how you define lethal and how you define rated. I ran through the calculation with reasonable precision. If you're counting species with venom, toxin, or physical mechanism capable of causing death in an unprotected adult human, somewhere between 900 and 1200 species, depending on the classification methodology. That's terrestrial fauna. Marine fauna adds approximately 1,500 more. Voreth was still. "That's identified species," I added, because I wanted to be accurate. "There are approximately 8 million identified species on Earth. We've characterized the lethality profile of maybe a third of them." He looked at me for a long moment. "How long have your people lived on this world?" "Anatomically, modern humans have been on Earth for approximately 300,000 years. Our genus has been on the planet for about 2.5 million. "And your population?" 8 billion, approximately. Current compact census data has it at 8.2. He looked at the table and then back at me. He had a very precise face. The Kedire do not have the range of micro-expression that humans do, but the signals they use are clear once you've learned to read them, and what I read in Voreth's face was something I had not expected to see there. It was not surprise, exactly. It was the particular quality of a person encountering a fact that restructures a prior conclusion. 8 billion, he said. 8.2. He wrote something in his log. The 4th and 5th weeks of the program were live fire qualification. I need to explain something about Kedire live fire training before I describe what happened, because the context is everything. The Kedire do not separate marksmanship qualification from environmental qualification. They are not testing whether you can hit a target on a flat, controlled range in optimal conditions. They are testing whether you can hit a target on a flat, controlled range, and also whether you can hit a target while navigating 3-meter swell on a simulated maritime platform, whether you can hit a target with a partially compromised visual system in high-particulate atmosphere, whether you can hit a target under the specific biometric stress load generated by a simulated predator encounter protocol they run as a separate station in the same sequence. The predator encounter protocol is exactly what it sounds like. The Kedire use it because Kethorivar Orc organisms are present on every qualifying range, managed by handlers, and kept in controlled contact with cadets at varying intervals throughout the qualification week. The theory is that marksmanship is only meaningful if it holds under actual threat response load. If your accuracy degrades 40% when a live apex organism is in the room, then your qualification number is 40% too high. They used a Kedire organism called a Vreth. The Vreth is approximately 2 meters at the shoulder, moves at 40 kilometers per hour at sprint, has a targeting system built around heat differential, and produces, under active agitation, a pheromone signal that the Kedire threat response system registers as immediate danger. I had been briefed on the Vreth. I had read the relevant documentation. I had looked at a photograph. The photograph had not fully conveyed the Vreth. The Vreth they brought out for the qualification week was named, according to the handler's log, Orveth 7. Orveth 7 was approximately 12 years old, which in Vreth terms means fully adult and operating at peak biological capacity. It weighed 680 kilograms. It was, according to the handler who had managed it for 6 years, calm for a Vreth, which meant it had only required physical restraint on 4 separate occasions in the previous 12 months. The Kedire cadets managed their sessions with Orveth 7 the way they managed everything on the range, with competence built on a foundation of genuine biological response. Their accuracy degraded under Vreth load. The degradation was factored into the qualification standard. A score that would be considered passing under clean conditions was adjusted upward when scored against Vreth exposure sessions, because everyone's accuracy degraded under breath load. It was the baseline assumption of the test design. I was the last candidate in the rotation. I drew my position at the firing station and heard the handler bring Orvith 7 into the containment corridor 40 meters to my left. I could hear it, not the movement, but the pressure the air made when it moved, a low-frequency displacement that I felt in my sternum before I heard it with my ears. My threat response chain said, "Pay attention." I paid attention. Orvith 7's pheromone signal reached the firing station at approximately the same time as the first target sequence activated. The pheromone signal was similar to Compound 7 in the Orc trial, which I had flagged in my trial log as generating a moderate to high response. The signal in the corridor was stronger than the compound in the sealed chamber, and the response was proportionately stronger. My heart rate went up by 21 beats per minute. My peripheral vision narrowed in a way I recognized as a focus lock, which is one of the ways the human threat response system improves close-range assessment at the expense of wide-field awareness. I did not find focus lock a disadvantage at a firing station. I fired the first sequence, then the second. Orvith 7 moved in the corridor, and the handler called a management action, and there was a sound from the corridor that I will describe only as very large and very present, and my threat response chain moved from moderate elevated to the specific register. I know from the 2 occasions in my career when I was in a situation where the threat was real and the options had narrowed. I fired the third sequence, then the fourth. Orvith 7 settled in the corridor. I could feel the air pressure change, and the handler called clear, and the last target sequence activated. I fired it. I am going to give you the scores because they are the point of this story, and there is no use in being coy about it. Under clean conditions, my qualification scores in the 4-day lead-in period had run between 94 and 97 on the Ketire standard. The lead-in was scored separately and is not the qualification number. The lead-in is where Vorath determined whether a candidate had the technical baseline to qualify, and the number to clear was 88. I had cleared it. Most of the Ketire cadets cleared it at 91 to 95. Under breath load conditions, the standard Ketire accuracy degradation ran 12 to 18%. This was the program's design assumption. A Ketire cadet who ran 94 clean could expect to run 79 to 83 under load. The qualification threshold adjusted accordingly. My score under breath load condition was 96. Vorath reviewed the scoring log 3 times. I know this because the handler told me later. She had been watching the scoring terminal from the corridor management position. She said Vorath reviewed it, put the log down, picked it up again, reviewed it again, put it down, and then sat for a moment that she described as the kind of still that the drill instructors do when they are deciding something. Then he reviewed it a 3rd time and logged it as filed. I want to be careful here about what I am describing and what I am not. I am not describing something extraordinary. I am describing the result of 23 years of professional practice in environments that required the specific combination of technical accuracy and threat load management, which I had developed not because I am an exceptional human being, but because my job required it and I had done the work. The breath was a significant stimulus. It was not more significant on the human threat response scale than the things I had worked near. It was different in its specifics. It was not different in its category. That is the part that took me a while to understand the implications of. Not for me, I knew my own history, for the compact's picture of humanity. The handler's name was Veth Orvath. She had worked the range program for 11 years. She was, in the Ketire way of these things, friendly, which meant she was direct and specific and did not waste language on framing. She came to find me after the qualification scores were posted. She found me in the equipment bay doing post-qualification kit maintenance, which is something I do because it is easier to do it immediately than to do it later, and also because kit maintenance is meditative, and after a qualification day, I find meditative useful. She sat on the equipment shelf across from me and watched me work for a moment. You scored higher under load than clean, she said. By 2 points, I said. In 11 years and 412 candidates, she said. I have not seen that. I kept working on the kit. The load was within a range I have a trained response for. It may have sharpened focus more than it degraded accuracy. She was quiet for a moment. Your home world produces many stimuli in that range. Yes. The trial compound set, the inland taipan marker. Yes. Your cortisol response at that compound was the 4th highest in the trial's history for a non-Keter species. I had not known that. I had suspected something like it from the way the lab technician had looked at the readout before she schooled her expression, but I had not had the number. Noted, I said. Veth Orvath looked at me for a moment in the flat amber way that is the Keter version of frank assessment. The compact's human dossier, she said. Voreth requested the full biological file this morning. Good, I said. There was apparently additional material that was not included in the original submission. I understand the original file was a summary. The full file, she said, is 417 pages, and that is the condensed version. She paused. Voreth has been reading it since 8th bell. I have not seen him do that before. He reads very quickly. I set down the kit panel I was working on and looked at her. What's on his mind? She considered. He has been operating on an assumption, she said. The assumption was that the Keter are the most thoroughly danger-shaped species in the compact's contact range. It is not an assumption that has required revision since the original Orc classification framework was established 400 years ago. She paused. The data in the full human dossier is apparently suggesting a different conclusion. I picked up the kit panel and went back to work. What conclusion? That you have been shaped by something that has been trying to kill you for substantially longer than Kethorivar has been trying to kill us, she said. And that 8 billion of you survived it. The room was quiet for a moment. Kethorivar is 4.1 billion years old, she added. The volcanic activity has been continuous for 8 million years. We have been on the planet for 200,000. The current generation of lethal fauna has been in approximately its present configuration for 3 million years. Our development under that pressure took place over 200,000 years. She paused. According to the dossier, your planet's dangerous fauna has been in approximately its current configuration for 50 million years. You have been under that pressure for 2.5 million. She looked at me. And prior to that, you were the fauna. Something like that, I said. She sat with this for a moment. The Vreth response, she said, the way you scored higher under load. Yes. That is not a trained adaptation. Not entirely, I said. The training refines it. The baseline is older. She was quiet. In the Keter way, the quiet meant she was processing something that required more space than conversation could give it. I respected the quiet and kept working on the kit. After a long time, she said, Voreth will want to speak with you tomorrow, before the debrief. He will want to know about your world in more detail than the dossier provides. I'm available, I said. There is a particular question he will ask, she said. He asks it of every candidate he believes has Orc. I will tell you what it is, because I think it is important that you understand what he is asking. She looked at me steadily. He will ask, what is the most dangerous organism on your world? I finished the panel I was working on and said it with the completed stack. I picked up the next one. You can tell him, Veth Orvath said, that I asked you the same question, so he has context for your answer. I looked at her. She was watching me with the same flat amber attention she had used throughout the conversation. In the Keter mode, it was the expression of someone who already knows what the answer is and wants to hear how you say it. The most dangerous organism on Earth, I said. Yes. I set down the kit panel. Depends on how you define dangerous, I said. If you mean highest direct kill rate versus other species, probably the mosquito. On raw numbers, it has killed more humans than any other organism, primarily as a vector. If you mean most lethal individual encounter probability, the inland taipan, the box jellyfish, the cone snail, varying by environment. If you mean most strategically dangerous, most capable of making an environment comprehensively lethal to other things, I paused. Us. Deathworlders was very still. We've restructured 4 continents, I said. We've driven 60% of vertebrate megafauna to extinction in 12,000 years. We've altered the composition of the atmosphere twice. Once accidentally, the second time because we noticed what we'd done and started arguing about it. We are in a current active restructuring of 6 of our 7 continental ecosystems, which will probably resolve in the next 2 to 3 centuries in a way that produces a geologically stable biosphere, but it will not be the biosphere that was there before us. I picked up the kit panel again. The question of what we are in relation to our own world is one that humans have been discussing seriously for about 150 years and have not resolved. We have a word for it. Several words. They don't translate cleanly. Deathworlders sat on the equipment shelf for a long time after that. When she spoke again, her voice had the quality that very senior Keter use when they are stating something that they will commit to in their records. I will make sure Voreth reads this part of the dossier before your meeting tomorrow, she said. He should have the context. She left. I finished the kit. The meeting with Voreth the next morning was the kind of conversation that takes a long time to set up, and then runs fast because both parties know the ground. He had read the dossier, all 417 pages of the condensed version, apparently, because he had notes. He asked about Earth's geological activity, which is milder than Deathworlders. We are not a volcanic world in any particularly dramatic sense. He asked about the apex fauna of the various continental ecosystems. He asked about human physiology in the specific context of the threat response chain, and I described what I could, and referred him to the medical exchange physicians for the parts I couldn't. Then he asked the question. I gave him the same answer I had given Deathworlders. I gave it in the same sequence and with the same qualifications. When I finished, Voreth sat for a moment with his notes in his hands, not looking at them. The Keter Orc classification, he said finally, does not currently include humans. I'm aware. The assessment committee that reviewed your qualification application rated your species as promising, upward mobile, not yet fully evaluated. I was told something like that, I said. He looked at his notes. The data in your qualification performance, combined with the dossier information and the ORAC trial results, will require a formal classification review. He paused. This is not a process I am initiating unilaterally. It will go to the full Keter Academic and Military Assessment Board. It will take time. I understand, I said. The outcome of that review, he said carefully, may include a revision of the compact-wide species assessment for humanity. I understand. He looked at me for a moment. You were aware of this possibility when you applied. It wasn't exactly a question. I answered it anyway. The Compact Liaison Officer told me the range program was the instrument by which the Keter assess whether a species deserves respect in a military context. I thought it was worth applying. You thought it was worth applying, he repeated. 23 years of demolitions work in hostile environment conditions, 11 weapons qualifications, high-altitude certification continuous for 19 years, I said. I thought the data was probably going to be informative. He sat with this for a moment. Then he made a sound that I had not heard a Keter make before, short, precise, through the front of the jaw. I found out later, from Deathworlders, that it was the sound Ketire make when something has been confirmed rather than discovered. It is what happens when a conclusion that was already somewhere in the back of the assessment gets the evidence it needed to arrive cleanly. There is one more day in the program, Voreth said. The integration exercise. It runs as a combined scenario, all qualification cohort members, 2 objectives, live environment, breath load sustained. I've read the specifications, I said. The scenario pairs candidates, he said. At the Ketire's discretion, I am assigning pairs based on demonstrated capability compatibility. He looked at me. You will pair with Cadet Senior Aseth. She is the cohort's highest scorer in the integration exercises run in years 1 and 2 of the program. If you are going to perform at the level your qualification data suggests, I want the pairing data on record. Understood, I said. He closed his log. One question, he said. Sir, you said the most dangerous organism on Earth is your own species. He paused. Do your people know this about themselves? I thought about the answer carefully. Some of us, I said, the ones who have spent time thinking about it. The rest of us know it without quite having put it in those terms. I paused. It's the kind of thing that's easier to see from outside. Voreth looked at me for a long moment. Yes, he said. I imagine it would be. He dismissed me, and I went to find Aseth to coordinate for the integration exercise. The integration exercise is not the point of this story, although it went the way Voreth had anticipated, and the pairing data is in the record if anyone wants to look at it. Aseth is an excellent operator, precise, economical, moves across broken ground with the Ketire efficiency that comes from being shaped by a world that does not accept imprecision, each step placed where it needs to be, each position held exactly as long as it needs to be held and not a second past it. She does not over-communicate. When she has something to say, she says it in the fewest words the situation requires. When she does not have something to say, she is quiet. These are qualities I have valued in every partner I have worked with in 23 years of field operations, and I found them in her immediately. The scenario ran 6 hours. The first objective was a simulated structural compromise in a multi-level installation. Identify the load-bearing failure points, sequence a remediation approach, execute it within the window. Aseth handled the upper levels. I handled the subfloor where the drainage infrastructure was the primary mechanical hazard. We cleared it in 90 minutes. The second objective was a combined navigation and target marking exercise in low visibility conditions, with Orvith 7 loose in the outer containment zone rather than the managed corridor. This is different from having the Vreth in the building. It means you are working in an environment where the animal is present and you do not know precisely where, and the threat response signal therefore does not have a clean source to resolve against. It stays elevated. You work in it. We worked in it. We completed both objectives with 40 minutes remaining in the window. Voreth noted the time. The point of this story is the conversation that happened after, in the equipment bay, while Aseth and I were doing post-exercise kit maintenance in parallel, because we had both developed the habit over the week and it is, as I noted, meditative. Aseth had been the one Ketire cadet in the cohort who had not, in the first week, treated my presence with the particular quality of neutrality that is what you do with something you have already decided you don't need to assess. She had watched me during the assessments with the same attention she applied to everything, without the pre-conclusion. I had noticed this, and filed it as data about what Aseth was like. She paused in her kit work and looked at me. You knew, she said, coming in. Knew what? What the qualification data would show. I kept working. I had a reasonable prediction. You applied, she said, knowing that the data would require a classification review. I applied because I was qualified, I said. The classification implications were secondary. She looked at her kit and then back at me. The Ketire have believed, she said, for 400 years that we were the primary example of a danger-shaped species in this region of the compact. It has been a point of identity." She paused. "Not pride exactly. Understanding. We knew what we were because we understood what our world had done to us. It has given us a particular way of looking at other species." "I know," I said. "It is being revised." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, working the kit with the precise attention she brought to everything. "My first assessment of you," she said, "was that you were a competent candidate from a species the compact had not fully characterized. I assigned you a probability." "What probability?" "That you would complete the program. 63%. She glanced at me. "That is the highest probability I have assigned a non-Ketire candidate in the 3 years I have been tracking my own assessments." "That's a reasonable first assessment given available data," I said. "It was wrong," she said. "It was reasonable with the data you had." "Yes," she set down her kit panel. "The data the compact has on your species," she said slowly, "has been apparently inadequate for accurate assessment for 31 years. The liaison officer told me the file was a summary." 417 pages is a summary, Aseth said. I thought about this. Of approximately 8 million identified species and a 4 billion year continuous biological arms race, yes, it's a summary. She sat with this. In the Ketire way, it was the particular stillness of someone integrating new information against a stable prior model, and finding the integration requires more space than expected. "There will be a classification review," she said. Voreth said so, yes. "I will be asked to contribute assessment data." She looked at me. "I will tell them about the Vreth load scores, and about the integration exercise, and about the pairing, and I will tell them that at the conclusion of this program, I updated my probability estimate for a human candidate completing the Ketire qualification." She paused. "I will note the new estimate in my record." "What is it?" I said. She looked at me with the flat amber certainty of someone who has finished the calculation. "That a human candidate who has qualified for this program will complete it," she said. "The estimate is 94%. She picked up her kit panel and went back to work. I finished my maintenance and packed the kit in the logged sequence. Then I sat for a moment in the equipment bay, which was quiet now, the range lights running on their overnight cycle, the low hum of the environmental systems the only sound. Somewhere in the containment corridor, Orvith 7 moved, and the pressure the air made when it moved traveled down the corridor and arrived in the bay as a low-frequency signal in my sternum, and my threat response chain noted it and assessed it and found it non-actionable and stepped back down. The baseline is older, I had told Veth Orveth. Older than the program, older than the compact, older than the Ketire's 400 years of Orc classification, older than the question itself, and older than the instrument they had built to measure it. I picked up my log and noted my kit as packed and cleared. Then I went asleep, because the flight back to the compact transfer station left at 3rd bell, and I have always been better at sleeping before an early departure than most people I know. I have thought since then about what the ORAC trial compound set was measuring. Not the mechanism, I understood the mechanism. I mean what it was reaching for, the principle underneath the instrument. The Ketire built that test because they wanted to find the species that carried the weight of their world inside them, the physiological inheritance of a world that meant it, the body that knows before the mind does. It is a good test. It measures something real. What it found when it found me was a woman from a planet that has been running that particular competition for 4 billion years and has not, in all that time, stopped long enough to consider what it has made. 8 billion of us. Not the lucky ones. There are no lucky ones after 4 billion years, only the ones whose line kept moving. 8 billion people who wake up in the morning and make coffee and argue about infrastructure and write software and raise children and do not, in their ordinary lives, think particularly hard about what it took to be here. The threat-response chain is still there. It was there when the Vreth was in the corridor. It is there now, doing what it always does, noting what the world is doing and deciding, many times per second, whether to care. Most of the time, the world does not give it anything to flag. Most of the time. Voreth's classification review concluded 11 months after the program. The board upgraded the human species assessment in the Compact's ORAC framework from promising, not yet fully evaluated, to a new category that required 4 months of committee work to define precisely, because the existing language did not cover it adequately. The Compact liaison officer called me when the determination was filed. She was characteristically precise and formally correct, but I had known her for 2 years by then, and I could hear in her voice the particular quality of someone who has been proven more right than they expected to be. "You'll want to read the determination when it's in the public record," she said. "I'll read it," I said. "There is a section," she said, "on the evolutionary timeline comparison. The committee spent considerable time on it. They found it clarifying." "Did they reach a conclusion?" She was quiet for a moment. "They concluded," she said carefully, "that the Ketire have been living on a dangerous world for 200,000 years, and that humans have been living on a dangerous world for 2.5 million years, and were a contributor to its danger for a considerable time before that, and that this difference compounded over the full timeline produces," she paused, "a qualitatively different result." "That's a diplomatic way to put it," I said. "The committee was being diplomatic," she said. The drill instructor's notes in the supporting documentation were less so. I thought about Voreth's face in the debrief room and the precise Ketire sound of confirmation. What did he write? She read it from the record. They thought they were the only ones. They were not. I sat with that for a moment. "Short," I said. "For Voreth," she said, "it was elaborate." I thanked her and ended the call. Through the window of my office at Vethara Station, the survey range was running a morning exercise. 4 demolitions technicians in full kit working a simulated breach scenario on the training structure at the far end of the field. I watched them for a moment. They were good. They moved with the specific economy of people who have learned that the environment is not passive, and that economy is survival. They did not look remarkable. They never do until you understand what they're made of. I turned back to my desk and got on with the work.